Ahoy everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nazir and today we are continuing the fantasy map making series in Wonderdraft. Now in reviewing progress so far, we've got a fair chunk of the continent still left to do, that centre area, so let's dive straight in. We are going to start off as usual focusing on the mountains and the hills. This episode, rather than focusing on a specific country or region, I'm going to take that entire area that we've got left and flesh out mountains, hills and rivers, and then we'll look at trees and some of the finer details in the next episode. And the reason I'm doing this big chunk in one go, rather than fleshing out a region as a whole, is just because a lot of this area is going to be fairly homogeneous. The centre of the continent, the geography is not going to vary too much. There's not going to be a ton of diversity, so it makes sense to do this section in one go. And we do still have the Big Wall label on there. Big Wall, I will come back and give you a proper name at some point, I promise, just not yet. I do spend a bit of time fiddling, moving my labels out of the way in this video, only you've seen me do it in the previous videos as well. It was only after probably a couple of 100 hours in Wonderdraft minimum, I realised you could just turn the labels off in that contextual menu in the top left. I do work this out later on in the video. It could have saved me a lot of time if I'd learned that sooner. For colouring, I'm going to do the same as what we did in Biotica, actually just get that base colour on first. And although normally I would save the colouring for last, I am going to do the mountains and the hills here first before we even get to the water and well before we get to the trees. And that's because, as I explained briefly in the last video, PC's starting to lag a little bit, particularly with the colouring. It seems to struggle with that more so than any other aspect of the software. So I want to get this part done before I go crazy with the trees in this section. Got a few snow-capped mountains as well, particularly towards the north of the area. Yeah. as I go around with that brown for the hills, and even when I'm doing the grey for the mountains as well. It doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, it looks a little better if it's not perfect, because you've got some colour gradient, you've got some variation then between the individual assets on the map. It makes it look a little bit more natural. Just blend in the white and the green in that northern country as well, where we've got a little bit of snow. And then going back round with the green where I've done the hills to blend it in a little. If this looks a little faster than the previous videos, that's because it is. Most of this, because it is fairly monotonous painting and hill and mountain placing, most of this video is on 7 times speed, whereas I'm normally on about 4 or 5 times speed. Just a little polishing up of the conflagration islands as well with that green, whilst I am on colouring. Now on to rivers. I'm starting in this country which you'll have noticed earlier had the label 10 Fortis. Now, this is a place, if you look at it strategically from a seafaring perspective, it holds that narrow bottleneck between the eastern and western oceans. So I envisage the crusading armies of Eros to sort of want to take over that land, maybe to dredge out a canal so they can cross that ocean more easily without having to travel all the way south to go around the tip of Kuladesh. So a strategically important country there, and that river placement is quite important as well. And as I'm now placing the rivers, I can go back and revise some of those country borders that I placed a good while ago to align with those natural boundaries where it makes sense for a regional border to be. You can tweak the settings of your river mid-placement as well. If you do the first part and you want it extremely rough, and then you want the second half of it to be sort of winding and with gentle curves, meandering down, you can change that before you complete your placement. So you'll notice I've done something similar with that river there. It's a bit more jagged when it's in the mountain ranges, where you might have waterfalls or abrupt changes where the river is avoiding rocky terrain. And then when you get to the open plains, the grasslands, the river sort of smooths out and has these much wider meandering curves. As I start to explore the map as well and consider, or reconsider rather, those regional boundaries that I'd put down quite some time ago now, I start to think, well, this northern border of Ten Vordis, it doesn't make sense. Why is it there? There's no natural boundary there. So I'm starting to put in some mountains and hills to justify that boundary. Because for story and political purposes, when I do get to playing this through in the campaign, Ten Vordis does need to be a relatively small country, so I need to justify that northern border. And it is important to remember as well, not every single country border needs to have a natural barrier. Oftentimes there are political reasons for borders being drawn. But just for some of them in this map, I know that I will need a natural border, but not for every single one. Sometimes I'll also look at an area that I've created and realise it's far too barren. So what I want to do is put some more hills in the western area of this country so I can then justify a few extra rivers that I need. And whilst we are in this portion of the map, just polishing off those small islands as well. As we've placed over in the Duan in a previous episode, I also want a river delta in this country. So that's what I'm building out now. This is pretty much the only time where you diverge away from that rule that rivers only converge and they never split. A delta is the exception to that rule. And again, deltas will usually occur close to the coastline where the land is, low altitude, flat ground. I say that just as I break my own rule again to place that city of Babos, but there is an exception there. That's an artificially split river from an ancient civilization that used to inhabit Babos. In the game, Babos is essentially going to be a ruin that was destroyed many thousands of years ago, but there's myths and rumours about the city being haunted, and people generally don't go there. And one of its defining features is a river that encompasses the entire city, so I just had to pop that in. It doesn't necessarily follow all the rules that I've said elsewhere. And whilst we are on rules about rivers as well, it's worth mentioning the lakes. It's quite a prominent feature in this part of the map too. Rivers, you can have multiple of them flowing into a lake, but almost always you'll only have a single river flowing out. And that is because water follows the path of least resistance. So if you did at some point in the lake's history have two water flows leaving it, the water would take the preference for the one that supports a higher volume of water, getting downhill essentially, and then the previous one would dry up. Sorry for the geography lesson there. That isn't that isn't the purpose of these videos. Because at the end of the day, this is fantasy. If you're building a world map like this for something like Dungeons and Dragons, fundamentally you can do what you like. You don't have to abide by all of the rules that apply to us in the real world. And there we have it. Mountains, hills, rivers, done for this section of the continent. All that is left is to get the trees in, put my labels back in, maybe do a bit of thinking about where settlements should go, predominantly just capital cities for now, and of course, as always, more trees. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and hopefully you'll tune in for the next one. Cheers guys.